Okay. Hey everybody, it's me, Emily, taking a break from the end of the world as we know it to discuss something we love, aka The Incredibles 2.
Oh
I
yeah.
have it twice, Malik has seen it once. We've been meaning to do this for a couple of days, but stuff just kept coming up. So, I don't know, do you want to go first as far as like opening thoughts?
You can go first on this one.
Okay, and also, I think it's good to, before I even talk about the movie, just kind of talk about how I felt going in the first time, because I think that's important, because it's been 14 years. And I don't know, in those 14 years, I've kind of been having an up and down relationship with Pixar. And I was kind of weighing my options on whether or not I wanted to pay money for this. Because some people who I tend to, even if I don't agree with, value their opinion, were like, it's not as good as the first one, and Pixar sequels kind of have a track record for being hit and miss, I think. Like, Monsters University, I think, is an okay movie, but I don't regret not seeing that in theaters because I didn't. You've got the Cars sequels. Toy Story 2 and 3, I think, are the only sequels Pixar has made where most people, myself included, can like agree that yeah, they're improvements over the first film. And I think this Incredibles 2, I'm really glad to say, is the first sequel since those to accomplish that. I think it is in conversation to be one of Pixar's best movies. Like, any problems I have with it are very minuscule, and I'll get into those when we talk about like stuff we didn't like as much, but this was really great. And I was kind of skeptical about the decision to open the movie like literally 5 seconds after the end of Incredibles 1. That seemed like kind of a weird choice to me. But it makes perfect sense just because it feels like feels like they never left. It literally feels like everyone from the voice actors to Brad Bird writing and directing, just to Giacchino doing the score especially, all just sort of came back. This movie could have come out a couple of years after Incredibles 1, like animation aside, and I think it makes perfect sense, every choice that they made. And I love it so much.
Okay. Well, yes, I also love this movie. Um, my favorite thing about this movie, as you mentioned, is that it feels like the exact same movie they would have made had they made the movie like how you make most sequels, and it would have come out about 2 years, maybe even 3 years after the first one, like say 2007, 2008, because the first one came out in 2004. Um, I I tend to when I'm looking at franchises, I tend to judge the sequels more on, well, look at my anticipation for a sequel more on who's involved as opposed to the studio. Um, like, I know it's a Pixar movie, and I guess Pixar is notoriously hit and miss with the sequels for their movies, but I wasn't looking at my anticipation for this movie and comparing it to any of the other Pixar stuff at all. Like, I knew that pretty much everyone involved with the first one was coming back, and that was enough for me to have complete faith in the movie, and I was really excited for it. Um, I was pretty much expecting for this to be just as good, if not better, and I'm glad to say it definitely met that expectation for me. Um, I it's not an exact rehash of the first movie like I was afraid of when we saw the first like teaser for this movie. It's not the first movie again. It is broaching some new ground, and I love the family dynamic. Um, I really liked. I know a lot of people are not big on screensaver, and I liked a lot of stuff about like what screensaver had to say. Um, I mean, I wouldn't call
Let
screensaver.
me just stop you right there.
What's up?
Since we're talking about Screenslaver, I just want to make a quick note in case either of us gets off the rails. Like, just for this first couple of minutes, I think we should avoid any spoilers. So just we'll give a spoiler warning when we're about to go into like full-on complete spoilers, in case
Okay.
anyone just wants general thought.
All right. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think Screensaver was a solid villain. I think that he was perfectly serviceable, and I wasn't disappointed. I didn't need for us to get another Syndrome. I just wanted the family dynamic to be on point, and for the story to be emotionally resonant, and not an exact rehash of the first movie, which is it.
Yeah, I was never really worried about it being a rehash. Like, even in their sequels that aren't so great, like Pixar's never done a rehash, I don't think. Like, even the sequels that everyone pretty much universally agrees are bad, like Cars 2. Like, the problem with that movie isn't that it's a rehash of anything they've done previously, it's a spy flick that's coming off of like a sports movie, so.
Yeah, it
Like,
just felt really jarring.
yeah, it can be jarring, but nothing they've done sequel-wise has ever been like a repeat. The closest maybe is Finding Dory, which hits a lot of the same beats as Finding Nemo, but even that is its own thing. And yeah, I was never worried that this was going to be a rehash. But on the subject of Screenslaver, like, we'll get into this more as we discuss spoilers. But first of all, I was worried in trailers that I was gonna find that name too silly. Like, hearing it for the first time, I'm like, oh, that's just a bad pun. But I got really used to it as the movie went on. I'm like, no, that makes perfect sense as like a villain name in this universe. Because and something that I really appreciate about this movie is that now I feel like I don't even necessarily need to see Incredibles 3. I just want to keep seeing superhero movies in this world. Like, I could watch a movie about Boyd or any of these guys just because it's such a not kid-friendly world, but also kid-friendly in the way that it's just so over the top and they go all out with the silly names and the really colorful costumes. It's like, yeah, you know what? Just like make a comic line out of the Incredibles universe. Why not? But I'm gonna have to disagree with you on Screenslaver because I don't think there's a lot of people necessarily that are down on them. But I personally am in the camp that thinks they're brilliant. I think they're just as good as Syndrome. And the one thing that Syndrome still has over them, I think, which is maybe the one thing the first Incredibles in general still has over this movie, is just the voice performance of Jason Lee. Like, I think that's the best acting performance Jason Lee's ever given is in that movie. And I really like the Screenslaver a lot. I think as written, they're brilliant, but their voice actor could have been anyone.
That's true. Like I said, I like Screensaver a lot. I just yeah, he wasn't as impactful for me as Syndrome, and it's not even really because he doesn't have per se like some deep personal connection to any core member of the family. It's just we don't get a lot of Screensaver in this movie.
Okay, it's weird. So we might as well, since we're kind of talking about this character, we might as well say the full-on. If you haven't seen the movie yet, it's time to get out. We're doing spoilers. And so 3, 2, 1. That was your spoiler warning. The thing about Screenslaver is it's really interesting because we don't see a lot of Screenslaver as like the guy in the mask. They don't have a lot of screen time, but Screenslaver is the creation of the real villain, which is Evelyn Dever. And can we take a moment to appreciate the pun that our villain's name is literally just a mispronunciation of Evil Endeavor? I love that so much. Like, I called the twist, and the second time I saw it with Eden, and she called it a little bit later than I did, and I'm just like, I called it early because I put together the pun. Like, there was no way she wasn't going to be the villain just because of the pun. But, yeah, I view her as the screenslaver, even though I really like how the movie treats it as she
Kind
isn't
of
the
a mystery
screenslaver.
until we get the reveal.
Yeah, not even the mystery. I think the mystery is really well handled. It's just, again, it's the fact that we're conditioned to go into these movies expecting the villain to be a twist and that kind of thing. I think if this is a movie that you see completely in a vacuum, I think this works perfectly as like a misdirection twist type mystery. It's just, villains who end up being like a twist have been Disney's bread and butter for the past couple of years, and so we're starting to catch on to the pattern, like Frozen and Zootopia and a couple of recent pictures. Coco. Coco did the twist villain. So it's like that kind of works against it. But this, like, I love the way the mystery is handled in this. And it's just, I like that once the reveal happens, they still kind of treat Evelyn like she isn't Screenslaver. It's like she says yes and no, I created the character. The Screenslaver doesn't exist. And towards the end of the movie, when Helen is explaining things to everyone, she says Evelyn was controlling the Screenslaver, not Evelyn was a Screenslaver. So that's a really interesting way to handle that, I think. But she is the villain. She is the one the Screenslaver is speaking for, and I think she has plenty of time and gets plenty of exploration.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Once you look at it like that, like she is the actual villain that has kind of made Screensaver the scapegoat, if you will.
Yeah.
It's kind of that Iron Man 3 situation with the Mandarin.
Exactly. It's exactly like Iron Man 3. And I really want to, I want to see the reaction to this movie from people who really hated that twist. Because it's almost note for note the same thing. Even though thematically they're about kind of different stuff, but it's like, ooh, that's really interesting that two movies pulled that off in such a similar way.
Yeah, I think it's because comic fans had an attachment to that character, and Ben Kingsley was so good in the role that they wanted to see that come to fruition, as opposed to them feeling like, getting slapped in the face and like, oh, it's just a joke and he's just an actor.
Yeah, had these movies been based on like pre-existing comics where Screenslaver was like a villain, or like an established themselves villain, and then this movie happened, you can guarantee people would be really mad about it.
More than likely. Yeah. I want to get my own real criticism out of the way. My only real issue with this movie is that we kind of give Dash nothing. Like, he has issues with his homework, and Bob is helping him with that. But if there's any character in this movie that gets kind of relegated off to the side and doesn't really have a ton to do, that would be Dash.
Putting a pin in the Screensaver for a minute, because I do want to get back to them. I think we could spend like 20 minutes on just that character, but we'll get back to them after, I guess, we talk about the main, like the protagonist. I kind of felt that way about Dash the first time I saw it. The second time, I think it's not that he doesn't have anything to do. He has a lot of things to do. It's like he has the homework problems, yeah, and he has.
We don't give him a real arc in the movie, though.
Yeah, he doesn't have an arc. He has things to do, like he and Violet and Jack go on the mission to help the parents, and he has all the stuff with the Incredibile. Like, his fixation with that car ends up saving the day in a way. But he doesn't, like, have any significant change like everyone else does. Like, you could argue even Jack does. Like, you watch Jack mature a little bit over the course of this movie, and Violet has her stuff that we can get into. But yeah, Dash is he's kind of a rock. He's kind of the thing that doesn't need to change. And I suppose that's a little bit disheartening just because, well, he had an arc in the first movie, but like, you feel like as a kid, he's still very much the kid he was by the end of this movie. And I don't know if that's a problem. I just think it's...
Yeah, it's not an issue. It's my only gripe with the movie that we didn't give him some kind of through line. Um, Especially
Yeah.
because as
My,
as as surprised as I am that they made all the Violet stuff work, I would have much rather seen Dash go through some kind of arc in this movie than Violet and her, boyfriend problems. Which, to be fair, they made me much more okay with that than I thought I would be.
right. Okay. So violent problems. My thing about that is I kind of appreciate that it's more off to the side. Like that's not necessarily what Violet's arc in this movie is about. Her arc in this movie comes to like the very first thing that she does, which causes all of her boyfriend problems, ironically, is that she gets really mad and really indignant about having to look after Jack Jack while everyone else does action stuff. And at the end of the movie, we take a moment when they make the plan to stop the boat, where she's like, I think this plan is going to work, but even if it doesn't, I should stay here with Jack Jack. And that's sort of her big like maturity thing. And I like the idea that she's not actually ready for that relationship with Tony until she has that moment of maturity. So like her boyfriend issues, we sort of conclude that as that's her reward for getting the maturity to be like, okay, I don't need to be in charge of the action necessarily. I can be okay with my role is to stay here and protect the baby because he's a freaking baby. And my powers are best suited to protecting people, so why not? So like I really like that idea that and it's interesting because I saw this post on Tumblr that was sort of talking about how the powers reflect everyone's positions in the family. Like Dash is the hyperactive one. Mr. Incredible has to be the one who holds the family together. Helen has to be really flexible, like a mom of many children does. And Violet's thing in the first movie is that it's all about her invisibility and how that makes her sort of a wallflower and nervous and socially awkward. But once she gets over that, her powers kind of have to represent something else.
Defensive.
So in this movie, yes. And she has to take that, she has to embrace that that's her role, is the protector. And I think that when she does that, that's when she's sort of allowed, quote unquote, allowed to get what she wants. And I think that's a really subtle, nicely handled thing. And it makes that's what makes the Tony stuff worth it. Because you're right, outside of that, it's just kind of typical like boy trouble stuff. And it actually brings me to my biggest problem with the movie, which I don't think anyone else is even gonna have, which is just that I think this movie chose a really weird scene to open with.
Oh, Tony getting interrogated?
Yeah, and it's just
I
because
don't think that's weird. It's unexpected. It's not how you would think to open a superhero movie, and I kind of like that. That we kind of did the non-linear thing of, it opens with like the aftermath, the big action scene that we left as a cliffhanger at the end of the first movie, but then we go back and we see it.
And I think it is a really well done scene, and I like it immediately puts you back into this world, this sort of Art Deco style, where you have the only illumination is the interrogation light, and you see Rick Dicker and he's kind of silhouetted, and it's like, okay, we're back in the sort of 60s inspired art style world of the first movie. And I really like it as a scene. I just think it's kind of a weird scene to be the first impression, because the very first thing we open the first movie with is, I think, such a brilliant first impression scene, where it's Helen and Bob and Lucius all sort of getting interviewed, and that gives you, it lets you know, again, like this is kind of a 60s type thing based on the quality of the audio, the way that they're speaking, and
How grainy
the sort of
the picture is.
yeah, the graininess of the picture and the design of their outfits looks very period. And all of their dialogue in those interviews is kind of like a dramatic irony thing, because everything that they say in that first sequence gets contradicted by what their role in the movie is later. And I think that's really brilliant. And here, it's just weird to me, like, for plot reasons, we have to get the fact that Tony gets his memory erased out of the way. So I'm not sure how else you do that. It's just Tony and Rick end up both being such minor characters, and Rick almost like drops out of the movie. So it feels weird that they are the two characters that our first scene is with. I don't know, it's not even a problem, it's just a weird incongruity with the first movie for me.
That's fair, I guess. I think, okay, two big things, two major positives that I really loved about this movie. Number one, I know that you like slapstick. I'm not as big of a slapstick fan. I don't, that kind of thing doesn't, turn me off or anything. It's just that's not typically my brand of comedy. And I was surprised how much of that stuff worked for me in this movie. Like pretty much every joke hit and landed, whether it was a physical gag, whether it was a joke that somebody said. All the humor was great and really worked. It never undercut the tension, and the action. My God, the action scenes in this movie.
Yes.
So dynamic, so much fun. Even the screensaver fight with all like the flashing screens and everything when Helen's fighting screensaver, that was like wonderfully tense and dramatic and like damn near scary.
And I feel so bad for anyone watching this movie with epilepsy, because even if they manage to enjoy the movie by maybe someone warned them when the scenes are coming, like they can't appreciate that scene. Like even for me, it's difficult to look at, but at the same time, it's even more difficult to look away because it's just so tense and really well choreographed. It's like, that's just a knockdown, drag out fight for a couple of minutes, and it's really visceral and And on the note of the slapstick, I want to talk about specifically the fight with Jack and the raccoon, because we kind of already talked about the first two. We've talked about Dash and Bite and how amazing that whole thing is, where it's like it starts immediately with he sees this raccoon and he's looking back and forth between it and this criminal on TV, and that tells you immediately, like, okay, we've kind of established where Jack's level of awareness is, because there's nothing up to that point that would tell you he's anything more than just a dumb baby who doesn't really know where he is or what's going on. But that scene, it's like, okay, no, he understands, like, actually that what they do is fight bad guys, and that he thinks is a bad guy, so he feels obligated to fix the situation. And so that's sort of a nice little, like, okay, Jack has some actual character now. And it's all done visually, and that's great. And then the fight itself happens, and it's hilarious. And I think part of what makes that slapstick something that will maybe work for people who don't generally like slapstick is Brad Bird, even though these movies have very, very, like, caricatured proportions for the characters, and they all very clearly look like cartoons, the way that they move is really naturalistic. And so it's not like when Jack is fighting this raccoon and they're rolling all over the floor and stuff, it feels kind of real. Like the way that he tumbles around and kind of has trouble standing up for a little bit. And it's not like a Bugs Bunny type thing where just there doesn't necessarily feel like there's a real sense of weight to people's bodies as stuff happens to them. That's all over the movie.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of why the action scenes are so tense, even though these are animated characters. Especially when we get the fight towards the end of the movie with all the superheroes that have been mind controlled and they're fighting Frozone, Dash, and Violet.
Oh yeah, that's great. And just on the note of that scene, because I don't know if we're going to come back to that particular scene, I really like how smart Lucius is. Like, he knows he probably can't get out of there. So, and this is I especially love this because he hasn't seen this car in over a decade, and yet he sees this car and he thinks, okay, I know how to make this work. Kids, get in the car. I'm going to open the voice activation for you so that you can get your voices imprinted into the car and the car will listen to you. And then you can get out of here by yourselves. And it's like, that's a smart character.
He really is. I thought that while I was watching it. Because...
hey, have you seen and or listened to those, on the DVD for the first movie, they have the interviews with supers?
I think, yeah, I saw those way back when I want to say I was like early high school, late middle school, but I haven't watched them since.
I found those on YouTube pretty recently. I can link them to you later. But they come with the stats for each of the supers, and I love that if you look at Frozone and Elastigirls, they both have like really high intelligence. Like I think they are among the highest intelligence of supers, and it really shows in this movie. And it's not something anyone has to comment on. They're just smart.
Yeah, that comes across in how they fight and the decisions they make.
Yeah. So. Again, with the first fight scene, the chase with the Underminer's thing, it knocks over the monorail, and like not a second later, Frozone comes in and he just makes a sort of ice rail for them to follow on. It's like, that's great.
It really was, yeah, and you can tell that they, like, even though this feels like a movie that they could have legitimately made years later, like just looking at the ice effects, you're like, yeah, that's they're using like top tier like nowadays technology for that, because there was so much detail in that, especially when like he made like the softer snow type stuff.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Helen and Bob specifically because they're the crux of this movie, and we haven't talked much about them yet. Let me start with Helen first.
Yeah.
Helen, she, she is of course, the flexible one, the one who's willing to bend towards the rules and not give much, resistance, as opposed to Bob, who's, hard and steadfast, and like superheroes, like they need to be a thing again. And Helen is very comfortable where she is, even though she doesn't, at the beginning of this movie, once they beat the Underminer, they've caused a considerable amount of damage, even though, they were protecting people and there were no casualties. Of course, with, the propaganda of the government only showing the destruction, they, of course, were locked up, but, their agent friend took care of that. They're living in a motel, and she's very comfortable with just being the stay-at-home mom still, even though they're not in a particularly good place. And she's not, like, once she finally gets indoctrinated into the whole being a superhero again thing, it's not really something that she gets a thrill out of until she's there in the moment doing it.
Yeah. And the idea of, because she's, like you said, she's flexible, it's not even that she's like steadfast to the rules. She just wants to protect her kids. And when she sees through the Devers like this opportunity to make, because Violet says early on that she just thought it was cool that they would get to like fight crime as a family, and Helen admits, yeah, it was cool. She's fine with like doing hero work together. She just doesn't see a way to make it work. Once she gets the way to make it work, like she's all on board. And like Bob has to convince her a little bit, but then she does it. And she's just whole hog, and it's great. So like she's not belligerently following the law to the point that she's just scared to do anything. Like once she sees a chance to make it okay, then she goes with it.
And what I really like about that scene initially, once they get back from that meeting, is that Bob, at least this is my impression. Like I only saw the movie once, but I felt like Helen wouldn't have made that decision to go through with it had Bob not talked her into it.
Yeah.
I know she's not like steadfast, but that's what I like is that Bob does have a very solid point of view, and he's the one that convinces her to take that leap of faith and start doing the superhero thing.
Mm. And I like in that conversation, part of her reasoning is just that I can't do this now. The kids are having all these problems. For all these years, I've been the stay-at-home mom. I should be the one who kind of does the kid stuff, so I can't go out and do the hero stuff. And then when it occurs to her that she has options because Bob is willing to stay behind the kids, then again, she sees an opportunity that she didn't think existed before, and she takes it.
And what I like about this movie is it's not necessarily easy for either of them. Like Bob takes on a burden that I'm not going to say he's not remotely ready for, but that he's unprepared for. He hasn't had the experience that Helen has staying at home with the kids for so long. This is kind of his first time really doing that. And he takes it on as best he can, but he's not perfect at it. And with his first time doing it, he's gonna mess up. He's gonna screw up. He's not gonna know what the right thing to say and do is all the time. And I like that there's a moment, I think towards the middle of this movie, where he's sitting down with Violet on the couch and he just tells her, "I'm sorry, like I'm used to knowing what the right thing to do is, and I have no idea how to do this."
Yeah. And part of me kind of likes the idea that maybe Bob would have had he definitely would have had an easier time if it weren't for Jack Jack. But just because Helen kind of assumes that Bob is going to have a lot of trouble, and he does, but a big part of that is something that neither he or Helen initially even knows about, which is just that Jack Jack is just this insane thing that they have to take care of, and it would be difficult for anyone, and there's no accounting for him.
That is true. And I love that idea. Like we hinted at that pretty hard with the first movie. But I like that Jack Jack has I think we see him display maybe 4 or 5 different powers, if not more, in this movie. And I like the idea that it's
more than 5. Let me think. Because he has shape-shifting,
he can make duplicates of himself. So yeah, we got shape-shifting, he can make duplicates of himself, he can teleport, he can turn on fire, and he can shoot lasers. That's 5.
And electricity.
And electricity, that's
oh, and the rocket nose thing. The rocket sneeze.
Wow. So that's Jesus Christ. So who knows? I mean, if we get a third movie, they could possibly give him more. Like I get the impression that Jack Jack just has limitless powers.
Yeah, and Tony Goldmark on Twitter, who's great. If anyone doesn't follow him on YouTube or Twitter, he's hilarious. He does he reviews like mostly Disney related like amusement park stuff. And he made a point that they really should do a time skip of some kind in the third movie, because we've got a decent status quo moving forward. Superheroes are legal again. We can kind of assume they've all been going on adventures. And you really want to know, once he's at like an age where he's really cognizant of morality, how does a kid with as much power as Jack Jack avoid just becoming a supervillain? Like, how does he not just go power mad once he's old enough?
That would be a very interesting and kind of frightening prospect for a sequel. Like we have Jack Jack, and he's kind of like Damian Wayne, only he never got rehabilitated by Bruce Wayne. He's kind of just um, like this impressionable evil kid.
Yeah, and I could see you doing it. Maybe the story isn't so much that he's already evil and angry or whatever, but just like you said, he's still young enough to be impressionable, and he hasn't really figured out what his guiding ideology is. And maybe the villain or villains in that movie like make a decent point, and Jack is really, really close to being swayed, and that's like the tension. Like, I don't know, there's really so many things you could do with this character growing up and growing into himself.
I again, like with the first movie, Bob kind of starts off in a fairly selfish place. He wants so badly to relive the glory days and be a hero again, and and he's willing to do that even if it means lying to his wife and
Mm.
and stuff like that, which leads to her thinking that he's cheating on him with another woman because she finds like the hair follicle on one of his I think either his costume or one of his clothes.
It's on his
Oh, okay. Um,
I'm pretty
and
sure.
yeah, and so that was his big arc in the first movie was learning to appreciate his family and kind of sacrifice the hero thing and realize that there is that one thing that's more important than that. Um, and then with this movie, yeah, he wants Helen to go off and do the superhero thing, not just for him, but for their kids. Like they don't have to
Mhm.
hide what they are, and they can do what what they want to do. Like, well, not to like their full extent, obviously, because Dash's arc in the first movie was, you know, realizing that he can do what he can do, but he has to reel it in. Like,
Yeah.
and that illustrated beautifully in one of those final scenes where he had to run for the relay race or the cross country race, I guess. And his both Helen and Bob kept telling him to slow down and then speed up and then slow down.
Yeah, they're like, don't give up. Make it close. Second place. Go for second.
So yeah, I really liked all that. And then we get into this movie, and ultimately Bob is coming from a more selfless place. Um, like staying at home with the kids is the last thing he wants to do, but he knows that's what he needs to do.
True, and I think it's really interesting because you can read it as equal parts selfless and selfish, because it's kind of the idea that his want for the glory days, like he had his arc in the first movie, but his desire to get back into hero work and relive the glory days again, that didn't really go away by the end of that movie. So that's still kind of like a defining character flaw of his, is that he really, or even if it's not a flaw, like a character trait, is that he really just wants it to be the way it was again, where heroes can kind of do what they wanted. And there's the bit during the conversation with Helen where she mentions, so our kids can have that choice, so you can have that choice. Where it's like, and he admits, yes, I also want that choice. Where if he, because he could, realistically, he could just say, hey, Helen, can you come back and help out with this stuff? And it's not so much, it is partly he wants to prove that he can do it by himself just because of ego and that like he's capable, but also it's he doesn't want to distract her from work because the end result of that work is he also gets to be a hero again, and that he really wants that.
That's very true. It is a very interesting gray area, and I like that.
Mm. And just to talk on Helen herself, just because I didn't really pick up where you left off there, I think it's interesting just how much we make her flexibility kind of her main thing in the sense that she also debatably doesn't really have an arc, Like, there's no grand realization that she comes to about herself necessarily. Her thing is, she mentions, again, back at the dinner table scene, she has a line about the world is this way, we need to adapt. And her specialty is kind of just adapting the situations. So throughout the movie, just as the situation changes, she adapts to meet it. And that kind of makes it so that she never really has to change because she's already the kind of person who can change moment to moment. It's great.
That is really great. On just a superficial thing with Helen, I freaking love the Elasticycle.
Yes! I was so sad that it only lasted the one sequence.
Me too. But I love that it was an extension of her character. Like, it could detach and, like, flip around with her whenever she needed to stretch and do stuff. That was so cool.
Yeah. And it's like, the scene when we get introduced to that also has a little line that is so, like, not consequential, but at the same time really telling of just, like, the amount of thought that Brad Bird puts into this, where she mentions that she had a mohawk and that Bob never knew about it. So that's just the thing where it's like, okay, that little joke reminds you again that this is a real sort of world that has a real history to it. And even these characters who have known each other for years and years and years, there's still things about each other that they don't know. And that makes you as an audience go, oh, these people have lived like real lives where they've changed a lot over time and they've done things that we will never know or hear about. And it's such great like setting. I want to, yeah, world building.
And I love that we have this now. Like that the Incredibles could just start and tell a real story, and we didn't need an origin story, and we didn't need like 20 minutes worth of exposition explaining who these people are and why they got their powers or any of that. We didn't need to hold the audience's hand and like I guess explain things away. With this movie we could just naturally tell our story, much in the same way the first movie did. And I really appreciated all that.
Yeah. It's because it's kind of weird in the sense that I want to say this really, really works as just a standalone narrative, but also it kind of doesn't because you need the first movie. And so I don't know. Like, you could never tell anyone who hadn't seen the first movie to watch this one, and you could maybe argue that that's to its detriment, but it's just like, all of the context provided by the first movie only just makes this work more as its own story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I wouldn't say to watch this out of context without seeing the first movie, because it is a sequel. That is like saying don't watch any of the other Marvel movies and just watch Infinity War. Like,
yeah,
you're getting nothing. Well, not nothing, but you're not getting the intended experience out of that film if you don't know all the important stuff leading up to it. You're just not.
Right, but it's kind of the MCU movies are actually what makes me think of that notion, just because it's true you don't get the intended experience if you don't watch the previous ones. But with the MCU movies, like, you won't get the intended experience of Civil War if you don't watch Age of Ultron, but you could still do it, and that movie makes sense as beginning, middle, end. Incredibles 2 doesn't necessarily have that, and I think that's fair. It's just that's what you would come to expect from a sequel, but it's really interesting because of the 14-year gap. And I had a question for you about something.
Okay.
I don't know. Some thought.
While you're thinking of it,
just in passing.
What's up?
No. Dad, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say that while you're thinking of that, yeah, I'm still scratching my head wondering why this took so long to make and why we kept greenlighting other Pixar movies, but there was such an outcry for this film, and like I know we could have made this movie back then. It probably wouldn't have looked as polished, but I feel like we definitely could have made this movie back then. And I don't know, I'm sure Brad Bird has elaborated on this in interviews and things, but I would like to know what it was that was holding this movie up. I know he said he was going to wait until he had a story to tell, but did he really not?
Yeah, I think he wanted to do other things. I think he wanted to do stuff like Tomorrowland and see how like a live action career could work, and just kind of work with other props.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I was wondering as I was watching the movie, like, this is all great and I'm loving it. Why couldn't we have gotten this years ago?
Ah, man, I thought of it just earlier, and I lost it. But a point that I kind of sort of started to bring up, but didn't really go into, which I think can tie us back to talking about the screenslaver in depth, which we still need to do, is again bringing up the voice acting, because the best thing about, or a surprising thing to me about the 14-year gap, is that everyone sounds the same. And I was kind of worried in trailers that people, and Craig Nelson as Bob especially, would sound too old, or they would sound older than they did, and having this not set in any amount of years later would be strange. But no, like, sitting down in the theater watching the movie, everyone sounds exactly the same as they did in 2004, and it's eerie.
It's really cool, yeah. It's literally like they made this movie like 2 years after the first one, and it was just sitting on a shelf.
Yeah. And, like, the kid they got for Dash sounds exactly the same as the first kid. But, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Screenslaver / Evelyn just as a character. And, my thing with Evelyn is that I like to say, and like the best on-screen version of Lex Luthor we've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Because they both have they're not superpowered, they're geniuses with technology, and they have the impression that, like, superheroes hold us back, and Evelyn especially, that superheroes create a culture of sort of like complacency and dependency, and that's what gets her dad killed. And it's really interesting because on the one hand, you have her initial speech as Screenslaver, as Helen is kind of tracking them through buildings and stuff, and I really love that speech, where it's like, it's so well delivered, and it has a real point where it's like, you get all of your stuff, you've kind of conditioned yourself to live all of your experiences vicariously. Like, you don't talk, you watch talk shows. You don't play games, you watch game shows. And it's both really topical for now and really appropriate for the period, because that kind of discussion has been going on since the invention of television, pretty much. And with this being set in the 60s still, that's a real, like, the fear of everyone's obsession with screens. And the best... Oh, I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, it has that aesthetic, but I like that even though it very much has that vibe and that feel, and that feels like the time period we're in, we're very much ambiguous about, like, what actual year this is set in. Like, in both movies, we never reference what... Huh?
But if we're ambiguous explicitly, but if you look at certain things like newspapers, they have dates on them, and one of them is like 63 or 65 or something.
Ah, that's fair. I guess that's true, yeah.
And, yeah, my favorite thing about that speech, and what makes it really brilliant, is that it's not just a speech that has a point. It's also, its point applies to itself. Like the speech about how you just will buy any lie if it's given to you from a screen. And that speech is itself kind of a lie given to you from a screen, because that's not really what any of this is about. Like, it clearly seems like Evelyn believes the things that she has screenslavers say about, like, politics and commercialization and stuff, but that's not where any of her real issue comes from. And so she has this big monologue through the screenslaver about how anyone will just believe anything because it's on TV, and people believe that that's what the screenslaver is actually about because it's on TV, and that's great.
It really is, yeah. This is more about superheroes and how she really wants to undermine her brother's really admirable and passionate goal to make sure supers get reinstated again and they can save people freely and fight crime freely.
Yeah. And it's not just her, it's sort of everyone, because outside of the two cops that we see interrogating Helen and Bob at the start of the movie, everyone seems to want supers back and doing what they do. And Evelyn has a thing because the original screenslaver speech is both not reflective and yet at the same time totally reflective of how Evelyn feels. Because when it comes time to her slapping the goggles on Elastigirl, and slight tangent, the shot of Elastigirl waking up in like the cold place when she has the goggles on, that shot is gorgeous. It's the first shot of any CG movie that I could confuse for a painting. But when she wakes up, and Evelyn has this thing of, why would you trust me? We don't know each other. And it's like, that I think can be so easily applied to the issue of, well, why would you just believe anything that's told to you because it's on a TV screen? Like, when she takes over Chad, the newscaster guy who's interviewing Elastigirl, he says, you're listening to me give you a speech through a screen, which I'm reading from a screen. And it's like, everyone just takes everything for granted when a superhero does something, or when a TV news reporter says something, even though you personally don't know that person. You can find like a newscaster really reliable and really trustworthy, or a YouTube channel, hoping not to sow any seeds of doubt in my YouTube followers, sorry for that. But yeah, if you don't know them personally, to Evelyn, that's like an immediate cause for distrust. And it's like superheroes for her are just that. Like everything a superhero does, they wear masks, you don't know who they are, you can't trust them to always have your back. And that's exactly what her father did, and it got him killed. And there's just so many different layers of like political layers, of social commentary layers, and like very personal character layers to everything that she says. And it's such great writing.
It really is. Honestly, the more we're talking about her, I think she is like a really good villain. And like I said, the only thing holding her back from being as good as Syndrome is just like her motivation is deeply tied to superheroes, just like Syndrome's was, but the difference is Syndrome was tied so deeply to Bob as Mr. Incredible.
Right.
And how Mr. Incredible kind of spit in his face when he was a kid and crushed his dreams of being a sidekick, kind of carelessly.
Like, okay, kind of a misconception going around from some people that, like, the reason that Gazer Beam and Pyronic couldn't show up to save their dad when they were called is that Syndrome had killed them already. That's not what happened. In the movie, they say supers had just been made illegal, So Buddy would still be a kid when that happens. He wouldn't even be Syndrome yet.
Yeah.
So it's those two were dead. And that raises kind of an interesting question of, like, clearly Evelyn and Winston would still have been very young kids as that was happening. So, like, who immediately took over the company? Have they been running it since they were kids, or did there have to be some kind of intermediary? That's just an interesting question that I think could
I would
be
assume there
raised.
would have to be some kind of intermediary until they came of age.
Hmm. And so, and the other question that I think is the closest this movie comes to a legitimate sort of like story-breaking, quote-unquote plot hole or whatever, that's not the appropriate term, but that's just the term I'll use, is why wouldn't Evelyn just leave well enough alone when supers were already illegal and what she wanted was to make them more illegal?
Well, she just
And,
wanted
like,
to stop her brother from making sure that happened, that they would be
yeah.
reinstated.
And so the question is, could she not just, like, get her brother to stop in private? And I don't think she could. I think Winston is too powerful and too, like, firmly entrenched in his cause, and clearly she cares about him. Like, I love the fact that they're talking about Winston together in the scene where it gets revealed that she's Screenslaver, and she's complaining about Winston, and Elastigirl says, but you love him. And she doesn't answer in the affirmative, but it's very true that she does. That, like, she takes him with her on the jet so that they can stay safe. And she explicitly says she's taking him because she wants him to be safe. And she's concerned with his well-being no matter how many complaints she has about him. So I don't think... She was never going to hurt him, and there was no way that he was ever going to come around to her viewpoint. So I think her scheme is the only thing that she can perceive as, okay, I'll just go along with what my brother wants, and I'll turn it against him, so that the both of us can get away without either of us getting hurt, but I still get what I want.
Yeah, that's... I completely agree. All that works out perfectly. I kind of like the Vulture from Spider-Man: Homecoming. I like that this is a villain that is still, like, no questions about it, a villain, but like, they have some degree of moral standing. They're not just crazy or willing to kill everyone.
Yeah. Like, you could... Actually, the more I think about it, it's really interesting. Her plan, had it gone on without a hitch... Maybe I'm wrong. I wanted to say that there is a version of her plan where absolutely no one dies or gets all that hurt, but she did plan on, like, crashing a boat into a populated area that was probably gonna kill some people. But through a lot of this movie, I want to say up until the boat thing happens, most of her machinations involve, like, not even a single person dying or getting all that horribly injured.
From what I remember from my first viewing, I'd say that's true.
Yeah, because Helen confirms there's no casualties with the train, with the maglev train, and it gets really close. Like, it gets really dangerous with the Screenslaver taking over the helicopters, but you kind of assume that they know Helen's got that covered.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, before I forget, that one of my favorite things, as just like oh, that's so creepy, in this movie, is after... Is it right after the helicopter thing? I think it's after the helicopter thing. And the Devers, like, limo driver or whatever is driving Helen through the march in support of her, and she goes up to the little kid, the little girl who's got the sign with her, and she turns it around and it just says Queen there, so chilling and so perfect. Like, that's just such a little brilliant moment.
Yeah, that reminds me of oh yeah, the originals. I'm not gonna get into that show here, but like a character that can like possess people and use them as their eyes in against the protagonist. Like they're all seeing and they can like hop in different people's bodies.
Yeah, and especially because I wonder if that like really hits for any of the children in the audience, because in this thing that's ostensibly a kids movie, without any words, we're saying this guy can make a child do whatever he wants as well as anyone else. So it's like it immediately makes the screenslaver terrifying, because no one can just make a child do anything.
Yeah, the implications of that are pretty messed up.
Yeah. And so I wonder if that hits a kid watching the movie, or if that's more of like when you're an adult, you realize the implications.
Yeah, I assume that would kind of go over a kid's head.
Yeah. You hope so. If I were a kid, you wouldn't want kids on that level.
No. But
yeah,
that's what I love about
both.
That's what I love about both these movies is there's stuff that's gonna go right over a kid's head that you as an adult would get and appreciate. Like how I mentioned before with Helen thinking that Bob is cheating on him with another woman. That's something that I think, you're an adult watching it, that comes across like that. But if you're a kid, I don't think you immediately snap to that.
If there was anything else you wanted to hit, just as a general thing, I'm going to look through my notes, see if I missed anything big that I wanted to talk about.
Anything else? Honestly, unless there's anything you wanna jump into, I just want to say, I'm so glad we finally got this movie. I really enjoyed it. It was just as emotionally resonant for me and impactful as the first film was. I love the humor, I love the action, love the dynamic between the family, and overall, I couldn't recommend this movie enough. Samuel Jackson is really good. He I want to say his role is pretty much about the same screen time wise as it was in the first movie, but Sam Jackson, as always kills it, whether it's just a voice or he's actually acting in a film. But yeah, I really love the movie.
Thinking back on it, maybe he got a little more to do in the second one. I don't know if I can accurately say that, but it kind of came off that way to me.
Yeah, it feels like he had a more prominent role, just the screen time was about the same.
Yeah. I like someone, I think it was at maybe Colliders, or something. Someone brought up an interesting point, which is like, the way that this movie presents it is that Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, and Frozone were kind of like the holy Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman trinity of that universe, and still are, kind of. And I really like that implication.
I do too.
Yeah, that's great. And we didn't talk about Edna at all.
Oh my God, I meant to talk about her in the beginning. She's so funny. She's so funny. I forgot that was Brad Bird until I saw the interview they did right before they played the movie when I went to the theater. I completely forgot that Brad Bird, the director and writer, voiced her. But yeah, she was absolutely hysterical. I love that she was like so keen on Jack and like developing like suits to fit his powers, and how she quickly shoved Bob out of the door. All that.
Because like you get the initial impression that gonna like not take to Jack Jack at all. But then they get along like peas in a pod, and it's hilarious.
It's so funny, and it's the last thing you would expect.
And it's also okay. So this I will also say in defense of this movie because people kind of have the complaint that the Bob babysitting the kids stuff doesn't contribute to the main plot enough plot-wise. Like it doesn't culminate in anything at the end. I don't think that's true. I think specifically all the Jack Jack Edna stuff with her making that thing, and you get the sense that it's in interacting with Edna that maybe Jack gets a little bit more proficient in his powers. Without that, a lot of stuff goes wrong in the climax because so much of Violet and Dash saving the adults only works out the way it does because of Jack Jack and the fact that they can have some relative level of control over him.
That's true. Well, that's partially true. Again, I only saw the movie once, but for me, watching that final act, I remember them like having to chase after Jack Jack a lot because he wasn't listening to them, and they kind of had to come up with a lot of stuff on the fly and improvise because Jack Jack was giving away their position.
They do, but it's not like, not that they can control him in the sense that he'll listen to them, but in the sense that they have that little device that lets them keep track of him so easy and lets them like control when he has the flames on and when he doesn't and stuff like that. And especially, I'm glad I remembered this detail before I forgot about it. Without Jack Jack, you straight up can't. I am. Without Jack Jack, you straight up can't have any of them freed from the mind control because what he does is. Oh, and he has another power that we forgot to mention, which is that he can levitate stuff with his mind. Because he does that with the trash can when he's fighting the raccoon. And then, towards the end, when he floats up to the Elastigirl who's got the hypnotized goggles on, what I think is happening in that scene is that Jack Jack goes around looking through the whole ship for his mom. He finds his mom and he can't see her face properly, and that bothers him. So he like levitates the hypnosis glasses off of her, and that's what frees her, and then that in turn frees everyone else. And so that's such a like, just by being a baby who wants his mom, Jack Jack saves the whole day pretty much.
That is great, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess now finally
Jack
I should wrap.
is, in a weird way, kind of the MVP of this movie when you really think about it.
Yeah, and it's so subtly done. It's another one of those things they don't comment on. But yeah, I guess there is literally no safe space here, so I have to wrap things up a little bit now. So final thoughts. The more I think about this movie and the more I talk about it, I'm just gonna come out and say I think it's better than the first one. I had them on par for a long time, but I think I'm just gonna give this one the edge. It's just so brilliant, and there's really no details about it that I don't love. And if I had the money, I would see it a third time, but I don't know if I do. But I wholeheartedly recommend it, and I hope people enjoyed listening to this discussion. So yeah. And if you have any other fun thoughts you want to give, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, like I said, it's still on par for me. I think it's just as good as the first movie. I loved all the character dynamics, the action, the comedy, the heart. It had everything that I wanted from this. It had everything that I wanted, everything that the first movie was, without regurgitating all the same stuff. It was just furthering what we had already gotten with a new, fresh story. And I thought it was great. I wholeheartedly recommend it, and I very much hope that we get a third one. This was Malik Myers signing off.
And Nicholas, aka the Ponderer. Like and subscribe and stuff. 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 And subscribe.